r/askreddit. Psychologists of Reddit, what made you realize you were treating a psychopath? When telling that he kept thinking about how killing people would be more fun than lame animals, stray cats and dogs and everything else he could catch. Only 11 years old. How do you treat someone in that scenario? And how likely is it to help them long term? My mum worked with a boy, 12-13 at the time, who had killed animals. He'd raped a sheep then cut its throat. He'd molested his younger brother. He was big for his age and wouldn't be allowed to be alone with female staff because he would always try to manipulate them and test his strength against them in subtle ways, i.e., he'd try to hug them but squeeze to see if they were strong enough to get out of it. They would often find drawings in his room of women tied up and mutilated. He wasn't allowed human-like toys anymore because he'd always destroy them, hang them, tie them up. The staff have all said it's only a matter of time before he actually kills a human, and at present there's nothing they can do about it because when he hits 16 he'll no longer be in their care. They had a certain degree of sympathy for him due to his upbringing. His mother was a junkie and would often sell him and his brother to pedophiles. They'd pick the boys up in a car, take them away, abuse them and then bring them back to her. Disgusting. Clinical psychologist here. At first I didn't know. If anything, given the context, he was more put together than most of my patients. The subject of his criminal past came up. I only knew he had served prison time some years before, not what he was in for. I had met with him a month or two when this came up. Turns out it was 2 separate sentences served. Both were for rape. In both cases he was the exact thing we are afraid of, a guy lurking in a dark alley jumping a drunk girl. He told me about these things as if he was talking about the weather. When it dawned on me that he expressed no remorse or guilt whatsoever, I got the same cold, gut-wrenching kind of primal fear you feel when you're out for a walk and almost step on snake. How do you distinguish between lack of guilt and something being talked to death? I imagine, in and out of prison twice for rape, you weren't the first person to ask him about it. Were there other red flags? I'm kind of impressed it took until you knew his history to get that primal fear feeling. Was surprised this summer when a student showed up to my office to talk to me after a few phone calls. He was a new student, we had never met before, but he was getting some things ready in anticipation to start. Yeah, on the phone he was slightly off, maybe spectrum or maybe socially anxious, but not my job or degree to diagnose or worry about. Student shows up to my office and all my senses are set off. I'm uncomfortable. Practically squirming. Power through the meeting and go on about life. Well, he keeps calling and showing up. To ask questions I already answered or to dramatize a nothing that happened. Again, could be a host of things. You power through because sometimes you are the only one that has the patience. However, I could never get over that sick feeling he gave me with his presence. His insistent behavior didn't help. One day he asks if I'm aware of his background and says you can Google him. No criminal charges though. I nod. Again, not unusual in my field. Few weeks later I finally think to look him up. Multiple dismissals from colleges for sexual misconduct. Accusations of a very heinous sexual assault at one. No criminal charges though. The worst case sued the school for not handling her case properly, and another time he was used as an example on why schools should be allowed to share conduct information with one another. He ended up having a minor incident with another staff member. She reached extremely poorly given the circumstances, but I kept trying to explain to HR, her male supervisor. Look, I know she seems dramatic, but you have to understand the feeling this guy gives you when he's being perfectly normal. Yeah, don't trample his rights, but try to understand a little where she is coming from. She's being driven by emotion, not rationality right now. What measures do you take to ensure your safety? If some of the people you are treating are psychopathic murderers, do you have a way of protecting yourself in case things get nasty? The PCLSV. That, and when he was describing how he murdered 2 kids. He had no affect. Didn't name them. Justified his actions as not serious, etc. Took a few sessions to acknowledge the murder of the 2nd child. He was in denial, assuming I wouldn't like him if I knew he killed the other one too. Imagine the brain that thinks someone will be understanding about the murder of 1 child, but offended by the murder of 2. So bizarre. Whoa, were you treating someone who was already in jail? Or trying to get information out of him to convict him? I'm just really curious, what do you do in these circumstances? Like, can the psychopaths be positively affected by any kind of therapy in a way that can actually change them? I'm on to you, OP. Manipulate the psychologists into telling you how to avoid being caught out. Classic psychopath maneuver. And I'm on to you, trying to undermine OP and make him self-doubt in your never-ending drive to manipulate and control others. Current psychologist working in a maximum security prison here. I've worked with 3 individuals I dare say would have met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder within the last 2 weeks. One commonality is that they use behaviors as tools to benefit only themselves. Self-harm not because they wish to hurt themselves but to use it as a tool to lure staff into the cell to incite violence, gain extra medication, be sent to the SHU which comes with a status boost. One person offered to get me a comfortable chair when we were in a session, not for my benefit but so that they could ensure I stuck around for longer to talk with them. A lot of positive impression management also. Sometimes you feel they care but there's unfortunately an ulterior motive. If he was lonely and wanted someone to talk to, is it really sinister that he would get you a chair so you would hang around longer? Just seems like something anyone might do. Often there is a particular face they make when they are relating a story, usually about how clever they are. One of the TED Talks on how to spot a liar calls it duping delight. Sometimes they can't contain their rage and you see them switch. Edit. Last sentence is a personal observation. Sometimes they can't contain their rage and you see them switch. I've watched the TED Talk and it doesn't mention this. Could you elaborate on this sentence? Why rage when it is delightful? Anyway, it sounds pretty interesting. You feel it in your gut first. Using a validated measure and constructing a thorough case history to discuss in supervision. This is how you test your gut feeling. But you feel it often quite quickly. It tends to begin with just a sense that something is off. When you're doing therapy with someone, we tend to build up quite a strong rapport with people. So there's lots of micromimicry going on, and you start to tune in quite deeply to unconscious body language. When you're in this state, sometimes you just start to feel very uneasy and you can't articulate verbally exactly why yet. This is often because of subtle micro-expressions, super fast flashes of emotion, lasting fractions of a second, that we perceive, but don't consciously register. You see flashes of contempt-related emotions and burglar smiles, basically emotions related to dominance and deception. The next thing you'll notice is a lot of use of projection going on. This starts quite quickly, usually in an assessment session. I mean, as an aside, being assessed by someone else can feel quite threatening to anyone's self-image, let alone a psychopath's. Quite predictably there will be status challenges, asking you about your credentials, your experience etc, and then often some put downs and digs with plausible deniability, joking that all psychologists are mad themselves, or just turning the tables by asking who's the maddest person you've ever treated. You start to feel on the back foot and like you're now being assessed by them. As time continues, they will attribute a lot of their own emotions to you as the projection deepens. Commenting that you look sad, asking if you're okay, or conversely asking why you got angry just then. As time passes, their affect turns from micro-expressions to more overt dominance displays, leaning back, smirking, getting up and striding around etc. By this point your initial gut feeling is getting more supportive evidence and it's time to bust out the validated measures. The biggest sign of all is a general unwillingness to show any vulnerability at all, or to be in a one-down position. The engagement will be superficial, often pally or matey, with lots of banter and joking, always flying close to the wind of outright mockery and contempt. They will start subtly and increasingly become overt in their need to control and dominate the therapy sessions. If the therapist maintains an aloof control, the ante may keep being raised and even end up with overt intimidation of the therapist. If you don't mind me asking, how do you deal with a patient when they get to that stage? Do you try to de-escalate in some way? Or just turning the tables by asking who's the maddest person you've ever treated? Reddit arps are the real psychopaths. When I was a student we had an interview with a lady that killed her baby child with a handgun because it cried so much that she couldn't take it. At first we weren't told that she was a psychopath and we were just told to listen to her side of the story. She was reading us from her journal that she made while she was in the institution. Not once did she mention that she was sad that her baby died, or how what she did was bad. She was just reading angry thoughts about her husband that left her and turned her in the police about what she did. She was justifying the killing because the baby was so unbearable, and once she mentioned that she was angry and mad that her husband did not believe her that she didn't have any other choice but to kill the baby. She was very smart and well spoken, and the whole time she was speaking she was trying to make us feel sorry for her for being locked up. We later learned that sometimes she was lying about not killing her baby and other times just brag about it, depending on who she was speaking with. Very normal looking person and very good speaker. Very normal looking person. This always makes me think about how many people like this I have interacted with up to this point in my life. Not a psychologist, but from my experience of dating a psychopath, didn't know until years in. A lot of what appears as emotion is simply mirroring emotions they see others exhibit and how they believe is the socially appropriate way to respond, whether or not they actually feel that way. This is how they blend in and appear normal to the average person. They are narcissistic, and everything revolves around them. They are always able to place blame on other people. Nothing is ever their fault. However, anything positive in their lives or others' lives is because of them. Because they are narcissists, they believe they are much more important than they actually are. They have strong influence over others because of their ability to feel nothing when manipulating others, and this is how they exert control over others. They will do whatever it takes in order to come out on top of a situation with no actual regard for others' lives or feelings. They may fake their feelings or reactions to continue to manipulate those around them, and they get pleasure over having control over other people and feeling like they're pulling all the strings. A good saying I heard went something along the lines of, "You never truly know someone until things don't go their way." I used to work for a lady and her husband, who I'd bet money is a psychopath. His little daughter had a nasty accident that required brain surgery and facial reconstruction. He filmed the whole ordeal starting from moments after her fall up to bringing her home and uploaded it to YouTube. In the video after her surgery, she's sleeping and her mom is sitting vigil by her side. They are quietly talking and her mom let out a little giggle, which I didn't find that odd. I mean, her daughter was in the clear at this point and days of worry were finally over. She was finally relaxing. Then he leans over and said we shouldn't laugh. That's not an appropriate reaction to this situation. The way he said it gave me chills. I'd always suspected his emotions were fake, but this sealed it for me. I quit way before this happened because my mom was dying, and even though she was toxic and we were not close, she was still my mom and she was dying. At work that morning he cracked a joke about it to the effect that it'd be nice if she'd hurry up and die. He thought I'd find it funny because I didn't particularly like my mom. No dude. That was Friday, she died Sunday, and I put in my notice on Monday. Creepy fugger. My co-workers and I used to joke about all the bodies he probably had buried on his farm, but we were only half joking. Not a psych, but I was in the room where my mum was being evaluated. Well, I wasn't in the room. It was like a police interrogation room with a one-way glass. I was there because they needed to interview me for an outsider's perspective. Anyways, my mum got arrested on suspicion to commit a violent crime. To set the scene, she was handcuffed to a table and she was pissed. She's always had volatile anger issues due to heavy drug and alcohol use. She was being talked to, questioned, all this other stuff. I was there for about 3 hours. She kept running this lady in circles to divert her from the actual problem. She was insanely calm, answering questions about various things that would scare a normal person. She barely showed empathy for anything and it was terrifying for me to watch. I knew she wasn't right in the head anyways. She was abusive to both my brother and I. But seeing how she handled the situation at hand, I'm glad I got out of there or it would have gotten much worse. I haven't talked to her in about 4 years, but she's tried to get in contact. I can't trust her and don't think I ever will again. Not a psychologist, but I read a story about a neurologist that did a brain scan on himself and found out he was a psychopath. He wrote a terrible emo book about it. His wife was not surprised, if I recall correctly. The eyes when they believe they're supposed to put on an emotion. You have to understand. It's going out when you bang your funny bone, even though it doesn't hurt, because all your life, people have cried out in pain when they've banged their elbow. You meet enough people like that and you find yourself hating any obligational situation in your life when you have to lie, like being asked how you are and saying good when you're not, simply because all you can associate it with is them. I'm not a psychologist, but I know a few, have studied it extensively, and my sister works with MH and the police. He told me he tried to care how people feel, but he doesn't know how that would even come about. How do you know you care for someone? How do you not feel indifferent? He just said he has 3 emotions: indifference, anger and pity. Okay, so what's the difference between psychopathy and narcissism? People seem to be only focusing on how most psychopaths are narcissistic, but they're not really mentioning anything else. I'm autistic, and, because of my very low empathy, I come across as mildly psychopathic. However, I have very low self-esteem. I do not manipulate people, as far as I can tell. My former roommate, on the other hand, was a narcissist who had trash-steeped tea, to the point where she abused and manipulated me in so many ways over the course of a year. Yet the descriptions in this thread are conflating. So what other traits of a psychopath are there? What differentiates us? I read that the lack of empathy in autism and the lack of empathy in psychopathy are actually different things. I can't remember the specific terms used, but it was something like cognitive empathy versus what we would think of as real empathy. Understanding versus feeling. A psychopath would have high cognitive empathy, meaning they can read what other people are feeling, but low real empathy, meaning they can't feel it themselves. This means they can do what they need to make someone feel what is useful to them without feeling any of the negative emotions themselves. Autism is supposedly the opposite. You feel what other people feel, but you can't process the emotions like most people. So you can't make the connection that you taking action A leads to someone feeling emotion B, at least not intuitively, but you still feel the emotional consequences even if you don't understand why. This is what leads to being overstimulated. I don't know if that's accepted science, but it made sense to me. Not a psychologist, but a nurse who sees way too many psych cases. One time I had a PT who was brought in after trying to break into a family's house while they were home. He was on my telemetry unit because his electrolytes were out of whack, and he was acting like he didn't remember trying to bust into an entire family's house with them home. He was getting antsy, but the hospital I worked at had a stupid fall risk policy that kept patients in bed, even if they were young, healthy, capable of being responsible for their fall. Mental health patients like to pace, especially when they start to feel like they're using it. So, anyway, I'm trying to keep dude in bed because if his feet touch the floor a loud alarm would go off, pushing his crazy ass closer to the edge. So, I'm in there trying to talk to him and de-escalate. We're talking and he tells me he is a bad person, that his cat was mutilated and his sister asked what happened to it and he told her the dog did it. But, he told me that his secret is that he did it. He killed the cat so bad that it looked like a dog ripped it to pieces. He also shared with me that he knew what he was doing when he tried breaking into the family's home, and that he wants to hurt people. Of course, I shared this info with the hospitalist and the psychologist, and, naturally, he was discharged free and clear the next day. No follow up with the law or outpatient psych. Gotta love it.